Hi, I'm Nawaf. I'm a second year PhD student in Dr. Yablanka's group. We are at FSU now. And I'm very excited to present to you some of our research related to large language models in applying in material sciences. So large language models or LLM do not need any introduction because we use them on a day-to-day basis through ChatGPT or via Claude. And we have seen many success stories of using LLMs in different domains like coding or applied to biological problems. And there is also big interest in using LLMs for material sciences like property prediction or to generate crystal structures. So here I have shown some examples of using LLMs on predicting properties of material. So on one hand you see there is a lot of promise in using LLMs, and on the other hand then you see some Twitter posts saying okay, LLMs are not good at adding two numbers, or it cannot count number of hours in strawberry. So it's now very difficult to reconcile these two results. On one hand you see big promises, and on the other hand then you see a lot of pitfalls. So in one of our project we try to do a deep dive analysis of the applicability of LLMs in property prediction. So before going into more details, I would like to show this is how we would prompt LLM model for a property prediction task. We have a prompt asking for the property of a material given the representation here. So here I have the atomic symbol and then the coordinates, and then the model will have to come up with the answer here, which is a bunch of number token. And during training, this number, which is a highlighted part, is masked, and the model has to predict it. And during training, we show many of such example, and the model will learn this task. So property prediction is a difficult task because it involves computing interactions between many body terms, because atom A would interact with atom B, and the LLM would have to now learn to compute the position of these atoms from this bunch of tokens here. And on top of that, material data itself has some inherent complexity. For example, properties are affected by both composition and the crystal structure, and both of these are highly correlated. So in some scenarios, only composition is required to make a prediction, but there are cases where you would need the exact crystal structure to make a prediction. And these are highly correlated in the sense that in some scenarios, the composition itself would tell you the crystal structure of material. So why is it now difficult? So when LLM makes a bad prediction, it is now difficult to say if the bad prediction is coming from the LLM not being able to learn the coordinates or the geometry part here. So the material science data usually is like a coordinate category data, where you have the position of the atom and then the atom type. So in order to address this challenge, we simplified a bit, and then we created this very hypothetical potential, but it is representative of physics potential here. But the cool part is that now you can vary the contribution coming from the category part, and then the contribution coming from the coordinates by varying the alpha here. So now we know when LLM predict the energy contribution here, by varying alpha we can know how much good the LLM is on these predictions. So with this potential here, now we labeled many synthetic data sets. So synthetic data set have data points, and each of these data point would have coordinate and category informations. And we created few data sets and we assigned labels using this potential here. And we have multiple versions of this data set where the alpha is varied. And here what I've shown is the prediction of LLM on some of these data sets for different alpha values. So when alpha is 0, the LLM makes big mistakes, or the prediction or the loss is very high, which means that when the contribution to the energy is majority dominated by coordinates, LLM makes very bad results. And you can see the error increases as the alpha decreases, and it's sort of form a cliff. So we define a name called coordinate category cliff to indicate that when the contribution is high from coordinate, model do not learn well. So we created multiple synthetic data sets, and then we computed the contribution to error coming from both coordinate and category. And consistently what we see is that LLM makes very bad prediction when the energy is dominated by the coordinate information, which has very big implications in material sciences, because in most of the property prediction the crystal structure is required to make a good prediction. But what we see here is that LLMs do not learn very well the coordinate information from the test representations that we have. So now we know that LLMs are not properly learning the coordinate information. It's sort of do a sequential matching. So we compare the performance of LLM to that of an n-gram model. So n-gram model works by doing a pattern matching. It finds a set of sequence and find a matching sequence from the training data that it has, and then makes a prediction. What I have here is the coordinate category cliff, or the metric that would tell you when the LLM is making a bad prediction, and then on the x-axis I have the complexity of the potential being varied. And what we see is that LLM follow a very identical path to that of n-gram, which suggests that LLM is not actually learning the 3D coordinate geometry part. It sort of do a pattern matching from the training data and then make a predictions. So in order to validate this hypothesis, what we did is we created a framework called MAT-test, where you can easily create test representations with different levels of information. For example, we have around 10 representations with different inductive biases, representation, very simple representations like composition, and then you have slices where you add additional information related to bonding, then you have SIF where you have bonding as well as then geometry. This would allow us now to look at the predictions on all these representation and try to see which informations are being leveraged. So we used then MAT-test to train LLMs on multiple properties. So here I have shear modulus, bulk modulus, and the formation energy on different representations. And what we see here is a bit striking but validates our hypothesis, which is that when representations have coordinate, for example SIF, they do not perform as good as some other representation like slices, which is again against our conventional wisdom, which says that if you have more information, the model should make a good prediction. But the problem here is that the models are not leveraging the coordinates to build the spatial understanding of the crystal structure, but it follows a sequential symbolic pattern matching to make a prediction. And we also then on a mechanistic way try to show these results by looking at the attention that is being paid to different tokens in this representation when it makes a prediction. And what we see here is that most of the attention in the self-attention is being paid to only the composition or the tokens which shows these are the atoms, and numbers receive very less attention, which sort of tell us that they are not leveraging the numbers in the representation, which would tell us about the 3D geometry part. But there is a very known strategy which is used in AI, especially in LLM, to beat any benchmarks, which is to scale up the model and the data set size. So we actually did a scale up to see if this would change anything. We scaled the data set from 30K structure to 2 million crystal structures, and on the model size we scaled from 7B to 70 billion. And what you see here is there is some slight improvement, but this is nothing compared to what the scaling laws would tell us in an NLP scaling for LLMs, where there would be a huge improvement. Here the improvements are very slight, such that it's not comparable to the best performing property prediction models. We also did some meta-analysis by looking at the different benchmarks leaderboards that we have, and what we see is that if we compare graph neural network with LLM, graph neural network are far better compared to LLMs in property prediction, which makes sense because GNN have strong inductive biases to capture the 3D geometry, and LLMs are not that great at capturing the 3D geometry. So to summarize the results of this project, what I can say is that their LLMs cannot replace specialized tools like graph neural network on certain tasks like property prediction. So we then take a different question and ask if they can replace human chemist on some easier task. For example, elucidating the structure from NMR peak. So for this, we created a benchmark called ChemBench, which is one of the first benchmark for LLMs on chemistry questions. We manually curated a big data set, around 2000 questions. And then we also created a platform where the chemist can take this test and solve the questions, so that then we can compare the performance of LLM against the human expert. So the results are interesting. So this is a overview of the type of questions that we have. But I'll come to the results, which is interesting, which says that LLMs on an average perform better than human chemists in some easy chemistry problems. And if you look at the best models, they are far better than some of the best chemists that did these questions. And now if you go in more details if you classify the questions and look at the performance, what we see is that there is no one single model which holistically performs the best across all topics. You have some leaders like O1 performing good on some of the topics, but they are also not the best. And in our in-depth failure mode analysis, what we found was that LLMs fail when it has to retrieve very deep chemistry knowledge, or when it has to do very complicated chemical reasoning task. But one of the limitations that we had in ChemBench was that it was uni-model, so all questions were test. But chemistry or material science, as we know, is like multi-model. Chemist would look at the plot, look at the XRD peak before answering some questions. So we extended this into a follow-up work, which is called MacBench, and then we again curated a different benchmark set, where you have questions coming from the entire research life cycle, starting from data extraction to experiment executions, like finding the XRD peaks and so on. So here again, if you look at the performance across different questions, you see that in certain tasks like identifying the lab equipments, they're exceptionally good or nearly perfect. But in complicated scenarios where you have these lab equipments in lab setups, they perform poorly. One of the cool set of questions that we had was, we created a scenario where the chemist is doing some unsafe practices, and the LLM has to detect these unsafe practices, and they were really bad at some of these tasks. And if you look at NMR or XRD, they are also very bad. So these tasks are not that difficult. It is easy for a average chemist or material sciences, but this suggests that they are not that great at being a co-scientist who can assist us in chemistry or material science research. So we did some more ablation in this benchmark to get more insight. A lot of questions in MacBench could be phrased in more different modalities. For example, you can have an image of XRD, and then you can also list the peaks as a test string. And what we see is that whenever the questions can be phrased only using test, the model performs better. But this is okay, because we know that most of these models are trained on very big test corpus data sets, and it is not that much trained on image annotated data set. For example, in a research paper, you have an image, but the caption is somewhere else, and this is very super difficult to annotate and create such data sets. Hence, there is a less number of data set. We had more analysis where looked at questions where you have it will take multiple steps to solve some tasks, and clearly there the model were failing. This is one of my favorite experiment, where we do some context engineering. We prompt the model, we give it a set of instruction on saying how to solve this task, which improved most of the model. But the best performing model, Claude 3, in our benchmark, the performance degraded. So which means if Claude is your co-scientist and you ask the model to solve some task and give an instruction on how to solve this, it would then do badly. So to summarize the findings from some of these benchmarks that we have done, we see that LLMs have limitation in the level of architecture when it comes to making property predictions. and obviously cannot replace chemists at this point, nor it can be a good co-scientist, because there is a lot of limitations in the chemical knowledge and the reasoning capabilities that it has. So what is next for us? From all these insights that we have from our benchmarks, we are super motivated to create a big data set. So we curated one of the biggest chemistry data set out there for training foundation models, and this is the largest as well as the most diverse data set. So here you have data extracted from literature, you have reasoning traces on complex chemistry problems, then you have code related to material science source in chemistry, and this data set is now released, and we hopefully would be training a foundation model on this data set soon. Before concluding my talk, I would like to acknowledge my advisor Kevin Yablonga for his amazing mentorship, and all my collaborators and lab mates for making the lab environment very nice. And I will conclude my talk by pointing to this article that we recently wrote, which is our thoughts and the lessons that we learned from all of our benchmarking efforts. Yeah, thank you.